Good morning. Welcome to the session on YEP, Text Still Matters. My name is Amy Eisman. I'm the Director of the Writing Programs at American University in the School of Communication in Washington, D.C. I'm also the Director of the Interactive Journalism Program, a weekend master's program that we offer. So this panel really is, for me, the intersection of a couple of the things that I work on. I want to tell you, I'm very excited about this session today. At the same time that we're rapidly exploring all these new distribution mechanisms and the semantic web and all the tools that we're going to be hearing about for the next 2 days, it often comes down still to what we see and what we read, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on your telephone, or whether it's on your site. Today we have three really leading experts on the field of web writing in particular. One is going to talk to you about the research. I know a lot of you are journalists and you don't believe it unless you see the numbers next to it. One is an accomplished wordsmith and is heading a team writing a comprehensive guide for style online, and one is an accomplished wordsmith and editor. They will talk about lessons learned and tips for the future. Now let me take a minute and tell you who we have. In order, Chris Barr is Yahoo's Senior Editorial Director. He leads the team that sets, teaches, and upholds Yahoo's editorial standards and practices. His group also produces the Yahoo Editorial Guide that provides Yahoo with writing and editing guidance for creating their web content. Previously available only within Yahoo, the Style Guide, and this is good, is being expanded for a broad global audience and will be published worldwide in 2010. And he will talk about that today and how you can get a hold of it. Prior to working at Yahoo in 1995, Chris was the founding editor-in-chief of CNET, where he established the editorial vision and mission, built the senior editorial teams, and developed some of the first internet editorial and privacy policies. Welcome, Chris. In fact, at a panel yesterday, I learned that your style is Yahoo ! S. Is that correct?
Well, if it's possessive, yes.
Yes.
But yet think of the bang as another letter.
Okay.
It's not an exclamation point.
Okay, gotcha. My next panelist that I want to introduce is Michael Gold. Michael co-founded Hippocrates, now Time Inc.'s million circulation health magazine, which won 4 national magazine awards during his tenure as managing editor and executive editor. He has also been an editor at Science 80 and Strings magazines. Early in his career, he was a reporter at various East Coast newspapers. As a principal of West Gold Editorial, Michael develops launch and repositioning plans, critiques existing publications and websites, and provides staff training. He helped conceive and launch Dwell, University Business, and AFAR magazines. Web clients include Discovery Communications, ConsumerReports.com, WebMD, Time Inc., AOL, and George Lucas Educational Foundation. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Hua Loringer. Hua is the director of Nielsen Norman Group and heads the San Diego office. She consults with many large, well-known companies in various industries. She is also the co-author of the book, Prioritizing Web Usability. She conducts usability research worldwide and gives keynotes and tutorials in a wide range of topics, including usability principles and guidelines, user-centered design concepts, and applied research methodologies. Her research has spanned the globe, including Asia, Australia, and Europe. She produces training videos and authors reports that include guidelines on topics such as B2B, teenagers, press relations, and corporate information. Hua holds a master's degree in Human Factors Applied Experimental Psychology from California State University in Northridge and a BA in Psychology from the University of California at Irvine. And I went to one of her sessions and I've been quoting from it ever since. Hua will tell you about why readers coming to your sites or to your content are task-oriented, and that will be a big lesson that we'll keep in mind. We're going to let each speaker open up with some comments about lessons learned about writing for the web for about 5 or 7 minutes each. I'm going to then ask some questions of the panel, and then I'll open up to questions from the audience. Okay? Hua is going to start and talk to us a little bit about the research.
Good morning, everyone. Speaking for 5 minutes is very difficult for me.
Okay.
So I'll try to keep it quick and concise, which is our goal today in terms of when we're writing for the web. So I want to cover just give you some highlights of what we've found with regards to writing when we do usability studies with target audiences, and just kind of give you some foundations here. Now, one of the major studies we conducted was done a year ago to see. To see what the user trends and behaviors are when they're online. Can you hear me better? Okay, I'm going to have to really get in here. All right. So what we did was we went into the lab and we recruited people to come in and do usability studies. We gave people tasks to do, for example, find a specific factoid. And we didn't give people any instructions on how to find this information. We just said, here's the browser, do what you normally would do to find the answer to this topic or to this question. And it was really amazing as far as what we were able to find. One of the first actions that people took was going to the search engine. It's like 80–90% of the time, that's where people would start. And this is a different behavior than what we saw years ago, where people would try to guess at URLs. So the high dependency on search engines is something that we need to think about when we're writing for the web, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in this session today. Okay. The other point to make from this study is that people spend very little time on websites. One thing to keep in mind is that people tend to spend more time on other people's website than on your website. So in general, on the home page, on average, what we're finding is that people tend to spend about 30 seconds on the home page, and then they either click on something or make the decision to abandon. So that number really kind of tells us that we need to make a huge impact on our home page in terms of directing people to the right place with our words. Okay. The second interesting thing to note is that once people are beyond the home page, they spend a little bit more time on these interior pages, but not so much more. Okay, so they're spending about 47 seconds, so under a minute before they either find their answer or leave that particular page. So these are just some really interesting numbers to think about and focus as you're kind of writing for the web is, what is the most meaningful message that you're trying to convey, and how do you do it quickly, because people do move on. We've done some research as far as with eye tracking technology. Now, in years past, when we did with the eye tracking technology, some of you guys probably remember the technologies where people had to wear these huge devices on their head, and we'd say, hold your head still, and then try to act as natural as possible. Okay, so the technology has advanced quite a bit, where now the technology is less obtrusive and it's much more natural for people to surf the web, and the technology stays out of the way. But one important thing to note here is the red or the warm areas show you where people are looking on the page. And by doing studies and comparing the data across websites, what we're noticing is that there is this tendency for this F pattern scan, okay? Meaning people tend to not look all the way across the page, especially as they go down a long page. One thing to keep in mind is the rule of twos, okay? The first two paragraphs in your text, the first two words in a sentence, or a heading, okay? The first two paragraphs, the first twos of things is very important when we're writing for the web, because if you look at this general pattern, and not everybody scans this way, but in general, if you can just really keep this visual in your mind when you're writing, this is where you really want to stay focused in using the keywords. Here's another example of when people are on the web, how much little time they do spend, and they subconsciously skip things they feel is unimportant at the time because people are very task focused. So if you look at this website here, the task is to find the location of this company, and here's the heat map that shows the general scanning pattern. that people are taking. It's kind of that F pattern, but what's really interesting to note here is that those images are skipped by completely. They're like an obstacle course, okay? And so what does that tell us? That tells us that people do focus on words. When people are task focused, they have something to accomplish. What they do is they tend to avoid images, especially if they look like ads, and it's the words that they're looking for to convey or to help them find the information they need. Okay. This is an eye-gazing pattern from a journalist. I did a study with journalists, people like you guys, to see, well, you write a lot of this stuff. How do you find information online? And it's really surprising is that your gaze patterns are pretty similar to everybody else's, okay? Who wrote this press release? A journalist. What is this journalist doing? Spending very few seconds on the top part of this long page. So we really need to think about how to write concisely. And really, our challenge is to understand that on the web, people want to move quickly. They're scanning. This is their behavior, and our challenge is to adapt to that behavior. Okay. One of the questions people ask us a lot in our conferences is, do people scroll? People do scroll when information is properly formatted for the web, and people feel that the content is related to the information that they're looking for. So this is actually a very good example of a page that is extremely long, but because it is formatted well for scanning, bulleted points, it doesn't feel like a big wall of text, it's not threatening, people tend to scroll more. Okay. And lastly, in this example, this study shows that using proper web formatting techniques, conveying the same information but presenting it in a very concise and formatted way increases usability. So in this example here, it's a rewriting of a white paper. And this was tested with people who are highly educated and are used to reading technical information. And even for this group of users, reformatting, rewriting the information shows that it increases usability. They're able to find the information they want more, and they're able to remember the information much more when the information is properly written and formatted. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's fascinating, and I know we're going to hear more about that as we go along. Michael, would you like to take over?
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Where's my assistant, Ben? Would you pass out, we're going to pass out a short handout that has a few before and after sort of makeover examples that I'm going to be talking about a little bit. First, I just want to...
Excuse me. And if there are not enough, we're going to ask you to share, and if we are going to make all this content available online later today. Thank you.
I just want to say I'm thrilled to follow Hua. The Nielsen Norman Group and everything they do is like gospel. Take everything she said as very important. I wish I had thought to bring my copy of Prioritizing Web Usability for an autograph today. But what she said, it's all really important. I'm just curious how many, I'd like to do a little bit of gauging the audience here. So how many people in this audience are in charge of or have some control over the presentation of the content as opposed to simply writing the content? So an awful lot of people, great. And is there anybody here who mostly just creates copy that somebody else presents and formats for the web? So it's a pretty rare case. So I think that's a really interesting difference about what we're all doing now. We're not just writing the words, we're really thinking about how they're presented, and everything that was just discussed about usability and whether people can scan and remember and make good use of it, an awful lot of that has to do with presentation as well as craft. So those are two different bases I always try to remember to cover when I'm working on content for the web. Hua was very diplomatic the way she said it, but there's another phrase that I know Jacob Nielsen, the usability guru that she works with, has uttered from time to time. I don't know if it's still in fashion, but he has described web audiences as lazy, selfish, and ruthless. And I find that a very good set of touchstones to keep in mind whenever I'm creating web content. And obviously there's some shock value there, but I think there's a real practical message, which has to do with 25 seconds on a page and just looking for things that answer questions. Again, I'd like to do a quick poll. Does everybody, who here believes and embraces in their work the idea that their audience is lazy, selfish, and ruthless in this way? How many people do that? Okay, so an awful lot of you don't. I suggest that you do. Now, it doesn't mean that you think of your audience negatively. That's just a funny way of saying the important points. Web audiences, we all know, are on a mission. They are task-oriented, as Hua said, and they're impatient. They have no time. Even journalists reading other journalists do that same kind of eye-tracking pattern. So we have to get over our old ideas about people reading every single pearl that we write, every single word that we write. Let me just do one other gauging of this audience. How many people here spend most of their effort creating content for print that just gets repurposed on the web? And how many people spend most of their time creating content dedicated to be on the web? Okay, so I don't have to do the sermon about, you know, we're not print journalists anymore and people don't read and behave that way. We all believe this stuff, so it's nonetheless important to remember it. So now I think these examples have made their way to most of you, and we will have extra copies later. So let's just look quickly at some of these things. The first one. Sorry?
We're totally right now.
Sorry. I don't have them. I was I foolishly decided just to go with print this time, and somebody said to me, you know, people don't like PowerPoint. So I'm sorry about that. We will post them later, and everyone will be able to see them. I'll try to do my best acting them out. The first one is very similar to this white paper, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it just shows 3 stages of a bit of copy that I pulled off of the U.S. Department of Agriculture site about washing fruits and vegetables. And it's meant to show that, as we all know, because we're all editors, we edit our copy, it can always get shorter, it can always get punchier. And so there are 3 columns. The first is the original. The second column is simply cutting the stuff up into bulleted sections. It's the very same words, but now it's in 3 chunks, very similar to what Hua was showing there. And then the third one is taking out that editor's scalpel and cutting away all those excess words, which we all know it's good to do in print as well, but on the web, that's like life or death stuff. So for those of you who don't see it, when you do see it, you'll see how the third column has exactly the same amount of information. It scans, it goes into your brain so much more easily. It's exactly what we want to do on the web. And it's what lazy, selfish, ruthless users appreciate. The second set of examples, the last 2 sets of examples are full web pages that I took the liberty of making over. And the first one is taken from I'll admit, a fairly old page from the site of Cook's Illustrated, which hasn't changed that much. And it's a review of pepper mills. I actually went on a crusade looking for pepper mills about a year ago because I needed one. And Cook's Illustrated has a lot of good information on their site, but this article is formatted and written in a way that makes all of the value of the article completely invisible. Some of this has to do with the fact that there is a fold in our world. There is an end of our screen, and we have to know what's above it and what's below it. And again, this connects to a point that Hua was making, which is if you format your page so that readers can tell, It's cut up into nice bite-sized chunks. There are bullets. There's stuff below. Then readers are going to scroll and scan and consume your information very efficiently and appreciatively. But this article has 2 long paragraphs at the top of the page. They're slow. It's kind of a narrative lead that we used to do when we were in print, but we now know that doesn't work online. And so nothing is scannable. None of the information is visible. So on the second page, those of you lucky few who I hope are also sharing with your neighbor, who have this hard copy, I took the liberty of just cutting this thing up and repackaging it the way you all do now. So the bottom line is at the top, and by that I mean you can actually find out by reading the first sentence of this thing what the best pepper mill is of all the ones they tested. In fact, the 3. It starts out, among mills 6 to 8 inches tall, the Unicorn Magnum Plus, now that sounds like a nice piece of machinery, is a superstar for grind quality, output, and capacity. It's also easy to fill and comfortable to use, but it's $45. Both the something grinded and the Xylus, at about half the cost, are also winners. So simple rewriting in the first 2 sentences, you know exactly what you need to know if you only have 10 seconds to look at this piece of information. Right below it are section heads to all the rest of the wonderful information in the story, which we can't see that information, but we can see that there's a section called Top Rated Mills, where to look for, how a mill works, how we tested, and the complete ratings. Those are all what some people call document navigation, a little outline of the story that you can't see, but you now know is down below and well formatted for your easy scanning and consuming pleasure. Okay, so take a look at that. The last example is, this is a service piece. The last example is a news story, a journalistic piece. I redid the New York Times. Look at that in your leisure. It follows the same points. Nothing's visible above the fold. There's a big non-informational picture up there, but as we just heard, people don't look at pictures. So in the remake, it's all information, it's all chunks, it's all to the point. Bottom lines are at the top. Okay, that's the end of my sermon for now.
Thank you, Michael. We're going to take questions at the end. Chris, but keep it in mind if you would.
So how many people celebrated National Punctuation Week last week? Awesome, awesome. Okay, what do you think the most, hold on, let me pull my thing up. What do you think the most searched on punctuation term was? Nope. Commas, yes. What was second? Apostrophe, then hyphen, then the semicolon, and then quotation marks like fifth. Geez, what's up with that? Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about doing exactly what these guys have talked about, because we totally believe in this, in the same mission, in the same thing about keeping it short, keeping it tight, keeping it clear. So here are some of the things that we've learned at Yahoo and things that we use. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. Okay. We have our own style guide that we built in for years and years and years, and we're going to publish it out to the web and as a book next year, and it's 139,000 words, so I'm going to very quickly go through just some bullet points here, not the whole thing. But let's admit it, English is not an easy language to master. And, you know, I mean, these are really simple signs up here, and it's really tough for everyday people just to get it. And even in the lower right, somebody, you know, put that apostrophe in above Greta there, who writes this stuff all the time. So here are just a few things that we think about, that we look at as we try to make sure that things are clear on the web. And why is that important? Why is it important to have clarity? Well, first of all, if you have mistakes and typos, they make your message really hard to understand. You know, what the heck is this person saying? They also create inconsistencies that make you look sloppy, and people think, gee, they just don't care. If they don't care, I'm not going to care. And if you have enough typos, there are studies, and Stanford did a study about 9 years ago that showed that typos can erode the trust of your readers, far more than you could really ever imagine. Typos and broken links are really bad for it. So there are some basics that we try to do as We have the largest copy desk at Yahoo of about 7 people, and we copy a lot of the things that come along. And we see some of the same things all the time. So, little simple things like this. Watch for common misspellings. It's so easy. Even though there are spell checkers, you'd be surprised the things that come in and get published. A couple of these things are style for Yahoo. For instance, email. We do not use a hyphen. We're an internet company. And website, we use one word, not 2 words. It's one and it's lowercase. And then I can also show you cases and do searches and tell you why website is one word is far more popular, and to use things like that. A lot of things that we look for also mistakes about sound-alikes. Sound-alikes are so easy to put in, and you see this all the time. Effect, every day. We see this often, and you have to explain it to the writer and hurt their feelings, but you need to fix that. I won't give examples, so we don't have a lot of time here. One of our major themes for all of us up here is to shorten it. Shorten it and put it up to the left so you can have get your message across in as few words as possible. But how do you do that? How do you put it into practice? Well, as editors, we look for dead wood or junk or however you want to call it. And so we say, first of all, to use simple, short words. We recommend at Yahoo that people write to an 8th grade level because, one, we have an incredibly broad audience, but also you will be able to attract people anywhere from 3rd grade up to PhDs in English, as long as your message is clear. You don't have to use big words, just make them clear. So when you're writing sentences, if you want to clear it up, make it shorter, punchier, don't start with there is or there are, unless there's absolutely no way to get through there. Delete words like very. There are a lot of modifiers that you can get rid of. Get rid of the, and just do a search for of the in your writing and just get rid of it and see if it improves it. You can usually delete always, existing, rewrite if you want to, and in order to just to, and always use the active voice. Michael was pointing out some rewrites that he did where the government had a passive voice and he wrote it to active voice, and it's just so much more powerful. And look for sentences that's starting with the word make and rewrite them. So like, make a copy or make a modification. Just say modify. Just simple fixes. Punctuation. So punctuation can be a real pain for everybody. So we have just some punctuation pointers that we follow, and things like this. Put your periods and commas inside the quotation marks for the most part. Now, also, these are just general rules. There are always exceptions to the rules, so don't follow everything, but for the most part, like in general. And of course, if you're writing for Britain English or Australian English, you have to use quotation marks a little bit differently. Put semicolons outside quotation marks. Put a comma after the city and the state. Put a comma after the day and the year. We use a serial comma. How many people use serial commas? That's good. Newspapers hate them, maybe because of the extra space or something like that, but we think they're really great for clarity. And then in headlines, we get this question a lot. What kind of punctuation do we use in headlines? And the answer is, you don't want to use a lot of punctuation, but you can use question marks sparingly, not all the time. Abbreviations. For the web, to make things shorter, we abbreviate frequently, and apostrophes can be a pain with that, and so you don't use an apostrophe for certain things. Don't use a space in the abbreviation for US. Don't add an S to abbreviations of measures. And then mobile applications. How many people develop mobile applications or have their content go to mobile applications? Yeah, not that many yet, but there will be more. And in that space, you have to figure that a mobile screen has essentially 13 lines. It's like writing for a matchbook cover, and so sometimes you can abbreviate even more. So even though on the web we don't recommend that you use SU or M or TU, if you're writing a mobile device, we think that that's okay. Numbers, I won't get into that, but we have things for numbers. Oh, by the way, I brought in a little form. It's on the back table with some of these top 10 tips that we have for writing that just help you become a better writer. And these help for everybody. My kid's in 10th grade, and he followed these things, and it helps him, and it helps our staff, and it helps all writers. So be sure to pick one up. Headlines. So headlines are incredibly important if you want to drive your readers into the content, if you want them to read it. So here are just some really quick tips for headlines. Front load your headlines. So you do that for a number of reasons. One, because people start reading from the left. They only read the first couple of words, so put the most important information there. Try subject, verb, object construction. Bush defeats Gore. Really, really easy. Dog runs, dog chews, something like that. Use concrete words for nouns, peoples, places, and things. And think about SEO. Think about search engine optimization. When your story is a day old or a week old or your content's a month old, what are people going to search for? Make sure that you have that in your headline, in your decks, in your subheads, etc. Strong, interesting verbs. This isn't new. Home prices crash is stronger than home prices fall. But is that the same thing? Is it, you have to think about the time period, et cetera. You don't want to change the meaning. Always call out what's important. Why are people going to read this story? And then also from an SEO perspective, stay under 65 characters. Search engines, sometimes it's 57 characters they stop with, or 65. SEO standards change year after year as search engines modify and change, but right now it's around 65 characters. Beyond that, they just don't care about that. In 2010, all of this information is going to be available to you, the writing public around the world, in a 400-page book. It's around July, and it's going to be really fabulous. In the meantime, keep an eye out for things like this. These are actual headlines. Well, not the man eating squid, but lesbians like straight men. I think that means lesbians are like straight men. And Bush says he's working hard on economic toil. Maybe Bush says he's working hard to alleviate, to fix economic toil, things like that. Anyway, so pick up a little.
Yeah.
I have found word clouds to be slightly confusing, and I'd like you to comment on, how did those evolve, and how do you think users are responding to those?
That's totally a UI thing, right?
We haven't done studies specifically just to study that, but we've encountered that just by doing other usability studies. And I have to say, when we ask people, what do you think that is? They have no idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
The question was, do people know, how do you measure the success of word clouds? Do readers know what they are? And the answer is they don't.
Yeah, so, when you present the concept, it seems pretty cool. Be able to see relationships between content, what's popular, all that stuff. But when people are online and, and they're just kind of looking for information and see that cloud tag, people aren't clicking it. And we ask them, what do you think this is? They go, I don't know, it looks kind of weird. Is it a picture of something? I have no idea. Maybe it'll, evolve over time, and people will slowly learn it, but for now, it's not an area that people typically can relate to well.
There's a gentleman in the back, and if I could get people to start going to the microphone, we might all be able to hear. Yes, if you could go to the microphone. Thank you.
Given that F pattern scanning that you showed, what is the best use of that far right rail then?
What is the best use of the far right rail? Okay. Advertising.
Okay.
Just don't tell the advertiser.
Advertising mixed with any content, or just give it up to the ads?
You know what? I recently did a study with a government agency disseminating health information, and so we thought, well, we're going to use that right-hand panel for related content. And we did several versions of the prototype, and still people were not clicking on that right-hand panel. I think people have trained themselves, conditioned themselves to kind of avoid, kind of see that as secondary or lesser important information. So if you have advertising or just kind of other fun or kind of interesting things that are not critical to your site, that's where I would put it.
Next question. Thank you.
Hi, this is for Chris. I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about the Yahoo style book and how it's different than the AP style book, for example, and why did you feel the need to have your own and to publish it? Are you expecting to compete?
Thank you. This is a plant, by the way. AP is great, and we use it. Chicago is great, and we use it, along with American Heritage Dictionary. But there's a lot of things that aren't in those style guides that are web specific. And this is going to include things like, from the very beginning, writing for the web 101, why the web is different. I know a lot of you guys know that, but there are a lot of people coming in who don't. How to find an audience, developing a voice, a lot of examples, a lot of real web specific information. SEO for writers. How do you deal with SEO as a writer? How to find keywords, how to seed keywords into your content. Online legal. What does DMCA mean to you? Does it mean anything? How to deal with fair use. Those types of things. UI text. So on a page, if you take away the words on a page, they're pretty pictures and boxes and things like that. But not only do you write the content in there, but you have to write what's on the buttons and the navigation and so on. So there's a whole chapter on how to do those types of things. What are the words to use? Let's see, newsletters, a whole thing about how to develop newsletter programs and best practices around those. I'm sure I'm missing all kinds of things, but this has a lot of information that is web specific, why it's different, how to write differently for the web, all in one place. It still has a word list and things that you need to think about, but it has things that those books that AP and Chicago just don't have.
Yeah. So Chris, do you think writing for the web you have to be grammatically correct all the time?
Did you hear the question?
You betcha. Unless you choose not to do it from a voice point of view. I ain't always going to be right. But it depends on how you want to say it. If you want to appeal to a large audience and have them understand you, especially with the time, and as you showed, people are spending less time looking at pages, and that's probably only going to increase. You want to make sure that you can hold their attention as quickly as possible.
Okay, next question.
Serena Carpenter, Arizona State University. I had a couple questions, but my first one is when you talk about visuals and images, if you have like text, this is just an individual kind of package. If you have text and then you put like a video off to the side, is that advised, or should you have like video, they click to the video and then they have a little text associated with the video, and then how should video content be structured? We have the traditional news packages, which are like 1:30, or should you kind of chunk it up a little bit more? And then my second, I know.
Let's answer that one, because it's a usability presentation question, and I think that would be fair to start with.
Can you describe what you're
talking about? Embedding video in the text.
Like, should you have a video player next to text?
Yeah.
Is it usually clicked on or not clicked on?
I think people are very, especially nowadays, like years before, just with the technology and the bandwidth, and videos weren't working really well, it was just very cumbersome. But with the advancement in technologies, videos are working much better, and people are very intrigued by videos. And so embedding videos within text is something that I encourage, because if you place your content, whether it's in video format, sound, text, images, whatever, but it's all highly related, it saves people time, regardless of the media. So putting related information together is something that I advocate very strongly. So that's something to do. But with regards to video, what we do find is that people will click on it, but if it doesn't play right away, or if it's buggy, or it's slow, it's skipping, then forget about them clicking on the second video. So it has to work right the first time. Otherwise, we call this kind of the hot potato phenomena, where they'll try it once, and if it doesn't work, they'll just toss it off, and then they don't want it again.
I can give one use case that was successful for Yahoo, and I think, is that Richard? Is that you here? So Yahoo News did a piece on the Michael Jackson Memorial, and they had bits of video, segments of video, after text. They would describe what was coming up, so visitors could get the experience without having to watch a whole show for like 3 hours or something like that. They could just get the highlights, and those things are just really, really successful with readers.
Yeah.
We have about 10 more minutes, so if you want to ask one more question.
Yeah, it's just about finding resources, because I'm fascinated with this idea of structuring text to kind of visually communicate to your audience. What resources are there out there that we could look up online, blogs, sites, where we could find more information about this sort of thing?
Jacob Nielsen, the founder of Nielsen Norman Group, has a blog called useit.com. and he publishes useit.com, and he publishes articles every other week with new usability findings, and it has a pretty good search engine there. So you could retrieve older articles and find research that we've done.
It's a great archive.
Yes. Next question.
Hi, I was wondering how you felt about articles that were written in the form of lists. Do you think that they are still very useful and concise, or are they just completely overused?
Are lists overused?
We're all preaching short and punchy and formatted and digestible, and lists are that. So I think lists in some format are always going to be very useful in this realm.
Except if they're used as the UI, top 10 reasons to remodel your home, and then each point is on a different page, and the user has to go through like 10 pages. That's not very satisfying because you don't really know what's on the page.
Or if the tips aren't parallel construction.
Correct.
Okay, next
or
question.
sometimes people pretend like they're doing bulleted lists, but they're just separating sentences with a bullet.
That's a really good point. I mean, all of this stuff that we're talking about is labor intensive. You can't just toss it off. It's another kind of craft we can all get into.
I call it visual editing, that before you post, look at it.
Yeah.
And sometimes looking at it, even before you read it, just kind of absorb what you're doing and see if it's going to work.
Yeah,
Next question.
So I have a couple questions. First, I wondered if you could say a little bit more about writing for SEO. You mentioned in headlines, but what could you say about seeding search terms in the body of an article? How often you should do that, how subtly you can do that?
Yes, it's really important, and we have a whole chapter on that in the style guide, and I can't give it to you in a 30-second answer, but it's really important to find specific keywords that are unique, that you think people are going to be searching for, and then you need to seed them into the headline, into the metadata, into the subheads, and then into the body copy as well. But don't get to the point where you're writing, blue suede shoes, 47 different ways just so you can have it appear that many times. You really need to be clever and think about the reader at the same time.
The other thing I wanted to say is that more of a comment, but you can react to it maybe, is on our website we find that certainly a lot of our users are task-oriented, looking for information, but they also really tend to click on funny, quirky headlines like a dentist who got into trouble dancing while treating a patient. So, so when someone's coming to an article like that, do you format it the same way? Or if you're writing something that's humorous or meant to be entertaining, does that call for a different approach?
My response to that is the news of the weird is very popular, and I personally believe it's because there's something fresh on a page that they haven't seen 14,000 times on Twitter, Facebook, news reports. And so I urge people on stories that are not as weird to really reach for fresh verbs and fresh words that are new, so that those I think people go to those stories because they haven't seen them, and they have seen so much of the wallpaper that's going on, so they're looking for something new.
But just to hammer home our common theme here, people like weird, quirky stuff, but you got to make sure they can recognize it as weird and quirky. Okay. So that doesn't mean write a clever head that's going to obscure the fact that this is about a dancing dentist. I mean, dancing dentist is pretty much, you're already there. So, the choice of subject is fine, but don't let it sort of tempt you into writing something obscure in the way of a headline.
Dancing dentist drilled.
Yeah, let's riff on that for 5 minutes. I just wanted to say one quick PS on the SEO. It can get depressing sometimes if you think, oh God, now I got to start writing for search engines. But the thing is, keywords, I mean, it's a funny thing about web writing. Often, if you just calm down and think about it, it's just often forcing you to write more clearly, more directly, more engagingly. And shouldn't we be doing that anyway? So, when you worry about including keywords in headlines and in the starts of stories where search engines see them, that's also where users look for things that interest them and where they appreciate seeing those things, those hot button words that connect to their interests. So think of writing for SEO as also writing for the human searchers, not just machines. And that's good writing.
We have 5 more minutes, so I'd like to get some more questions in.
Thanks. I'll try to make it quick. This is a question regarding style guides, especially with web writing. Terminology changes almost at the speed of light. I mean, homepage, as you pointed out, Chris, was a great example. You've got it as 1 word. It used to be 2 words. Web used to be always capped. Now it's not. Emails hyphen, no hyphen. The question is, how do you propagate those changes across the organization? I actually, not to call this out or anything, but if you search for search for Yahoo on Google, the first line of your metadata says homepage 2 words.
Yeah.
So how do you propagate it again? Sorry.
Oh, I can give you a million more, so you know.
Yeah, and I know, I'm sure you're tearing your hair out, but I have the same challenges when you propagate across a large organization. How do you do that most effectively, especially with things like metadata?
It's a word list. So we keep the word list and we distribute it as well as we can. And when you're in a large organization, of course, there are, like, sports has its own word list that in addition to, and finance has its own addition to. So it's hard to keep it together. But essentially, we're the authority, and sometimes we have to be the police, and then it's a challenge. But a word list, a constantly updated word list that's available to the entire company on an intranet is how we do it.
Okay.
Hi, Matt Gullis from Plan Philly. I just have a comment on the presentation issue. I found out that through analytics that 50% of the web traffic on my site was coming through my email alert that I sent out every week. And so I had to start thinking about the presentation issues in the email, where at first I was just like blasting a letter out there. But all of a sudden then I started thinking, wait a minute, that much traffic's coming through a document that I'm sending out. I really have to format it and make it work, much like I'm trying to make the website work.
Well, you've done some research on email?
We find that, even with all these technologies, email newsletters is still one of the best ways to continue relationship building with your customers and keep them informed about new products and services. The thing with email newsletters is that, people are just busy. Their email, their inboxes are just stuffed with junk. And so, it comes back to what we've been talking about, in this session is, make sure you start your, subject lines with that information carrying word, keywords, make your subject lines punchy. Within your email newsletter, make sure there's a clear call to action. Sometimes you read these newsletters and you go, well, what does this company want me to do now? So you want to make sure that you format your newsletter so that it's short, concise, and has this call to action, and also have a punchy subject line.
Great. I'm going to say that these are the last 3 questions, so let's get the 3 of you to the microphone.
Hi, Brian Wally from Smithsonian Magazine. And so we've had some good success with photo essays in terms of great, fantastic photos from the solar system, or great nature photographs, or things along those lines, in which we have an extended caption of 60 to 80 words. And I've seen other sites that have done, pretty similar things with celebrity photos, which is not exactly our specialty. But so what's the best way to marry that sort of amount of text when the photo is really what's telling the story, and it's not a text-based story that you're trying to tell?
Caption writing, I guess we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, if your audience wants to look at those photos, then by all means, put them front and center and give a nice, accessible way to get to them, and then, just clear, informative captions.
We use slideshows a lot too, especially with celebrity-type things or sports-type moments, and we use a lot also in Asia and India, where they're really popular, because the imagery is great. A picture's worth 1,000 words, so the caption doesn't need to be 1,000 words. It just needs to be enough to explain to your audience exactly what they're seeing.
Yes.
My name is Ben Waxman. I'm with the Philadelphia Daily News editorial board. And I work on a project called It's Our Money, which is a sort of very specialized look at city government in Philadelphia. And so I'm kind of wondering how some of the sort of tips you've offered apply to very specialized coverage. It seems like what you're kind of talking about is sort of very broad, general ideas. And I'm wondering, in terms of length of a time someone spends on a site. I mean, there are people who are searching out specific information, right, and then find a site and will spend many hours, multiple days, whatever, looking at this thing because that's exactly what they're looking for. So I guess I'm wondering how you differentiate between those two, sort of the broad general audience and a very specialized sort of narrow interest.
Well, I don't think any of us is saying that you should have less information. I think we're talking about organization and the way it's presented online through the word choice and how it's structured. But the amount of information you have is N, and you have to have that, especially if you're talking about city government and corruption or something like that. There are the players, so the information has to be there. It's just people will appreciate it if you can structure it for the medium.
It just has to be clear and it has to work. I'm unimpressed sometimes with news organizations that put so much work into a project except for the last moment of where it is between the project and the reader. They have pages and pages and pages of wonderful content deeply in the site, but forgot at the end to present it in a way to get people to that really good, deep content. Final question.
I just wanted a really quick P.S., Ben. You know your audience. You know what they're interested in, presumably. You know what depth they're hoping to go to. So you tailor your site to those needs, but still all the rules apply. They may want to look at pictures because I've worked on a lot of medical and health sites. Scary pictures of eyeballs and X-rays and stuff. Doctors want to look at that stuff, but you got to know your audience.
I'm Rachel from a financial newspaper in Brazil. A lot of companies are merging their newsrooms. Do you believe is it possible to write in the same way for the newspaper and for the web, or the journalists will have to write differently depending on where the story will be published?
What do you think? That's a good question, and I think it comes down to what Amy, you were saying, like the last mile. Newspapers are great. I love newspapers. I spend a gazillion dollars to read the New York Times every day because I love the way it opens up and I can scan the stories and so on. But it's not the same experience online. Reading the New York Times online is not the same, and I don't think that a lot of companies do a really good job of taking their print versions and then reformatting them for online, because the information is there, but you read it a little bit differently, you absorb it a little bit differently. So I think it can happen, but you have to think through what the different modes are, so how people are actually going to get this information. And that has to happen in the newsroom at the edit desk when it goes, just before it gets published. And I know often the information will get published to the web first, so you can get your exclusives up there and so on. But to really publish well, you need to think it through. You need to think about layout. And maybe newspapers need to think about, okay, here are our 5 basic layouts that we can work with for each story, and how does it work, and how do we take this big block of text and have it work with one of these formats.
Okay, I'm getting the signal from the back, and I know that I'm standing between you and lunch. I want to thank our panelists for doing such a terrific job of walking us through the world of web writing.